Hi everyone, we're excited to have you join Registrar Corp for 51% of FDA's FSVP audits fail. 3 new ways to ensure success. We'll be discussing common FSVP challenges, best practices, and tools to automate and simplify FSVP compliance. I'm proud to introduce our first speaker, Coley Anderson, Director of Industry and Government Relations. Coley has more than 17 years of experience with FDA compliance and conducts seminars on US FDA in more than 20 countries. Without any further ado, Coley, take it away.
Thank you, Alexis, and welcome everyone to our FSVP webinar. I'm excited to have my colleague John Kelly here. While he's new to Registrar Corp, he is definitely not new to the industry. 10 years of experience of advising businesses on regulatory compliance. He addresses supply chain management and risk reduction. So we're going to hear from John a little later in the show. But hi, John. So next. I'm also super excited to have one of our clients, Alex Cohen from Nathel & Nathel, a produce importer with over 100 years of business experience in importing. So Alex is going to bring to the table his experience as he oversees and administers the food safety and government compliance at Nathel & Nathel, his experience as he stewards many of their systems at the company, and he's president of Cohen and Associates LLC, a consulting firm helping clients in their manufacturing and distribution operations. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Coley.
Next. So I thought before we dive into the topic, we should level set and really let you know who Registrar Corp is, who's speaking today. And I think that's important. Registrar Corp is truly the global leader in FDA regulatory compliance. We have over 30,000 companies around the world that we work with. We monitor over 45,000 companies' FDA compliance status, operate in 175 countries, and we have 20 offices worldwide. So with 20 plus years of experience, we are very happy to be here with you today. We bring our regulatory knowledge to the table, as well as our experiences and feedback from our clients from all over the world, as well as U.S. importers. Next slide. Also, I think it's important that not only do you know who you're speaking to, but who we work with. In the food and beverage industry, the cosmetic industry, we work with retail, importer distributors, manufacturers. All of them use Registrar Corp as their FDA compliance resource. Next slide. So let's take a quick look at our agenda. We're going to do an FSVP review, a real quick high level. Most of you are familiar with FSVP. We're going to talk about best practices, some of the challenges, and some solutions that Registrar Corp can offer to help you comply with this regulation. Next slide. So let's take a look at FSVP. What is it? So let's just not even assume that everyone knows the acronym. Clearly, Foreign Supplier Verification Program is what FSVP is. Now, who is responsible for FSVP? Well, that's the importer of food and beverages to the United States. Why? Why is the importer responsible? Well, FDA says it's because of you, importer, that these products are entering the country. And while FDA cannot inspect everything at the port, at the facility, so they need help. And so they've outsourced some of the responsibility to the U.S. importer. And, it's always been the big question, how do you know that you're FSVP responsible? Well, I always say this litmus test here of questions is a good way to find out. Did you agree to purchase the product before it left the country? Do you own it at the time of entry? Are you the ultimate consignee? Is the product imported for you and only you? And if you can answer yes to these questions, more than likely you are the FSVP importer. Now I want to take a moment, Alex. When does your company acknowledge, confirm, or discuss FSVP responsibilities?
We bake it right into our vendor approval process. These questions are all questions you should be asking when you're dealing with either new partners in your supply chain or during your annual evaluations of each of your vendors. For us, these questions are all a great jumping off point. But critical to success is also having in writing an affidavit signed by you and your vendors acknowledging that conversation happened and stating who's going to be the FSVP, having evaluated these questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. Next slide. Very important to confirm that up front. Now, it's amazing. 51% of U.S. importers failed the FSVP audit last year. 51%. And the number one reason is because they didn't even develop an FSVP. So when you look at these violations, you can understand that people are still working to comply, and so it's so important that you really get this done. And a lot of people are doing them post shipments when they really should be done pre-shipments. So I just say, Alex, looking at all of this, what do you think of all of these could be most challenging for the typical U.S. importer, whether it's produce or not? And maybe that's the
Well,
reason they're not doing it.
judging by the 80-20 rule, 80% of the violators that are listed here are probably going to be the small mom and pop importers, the companies with a few staff members and maybe a warehouse. Developing the FSVP plan can be very prohibitive, especially if you don't have a long history of developing QMSs or other types of formal documentation for these programs. It's a big front hurdle. Evaluating the documents once you have those plans established is a little bit more straightforward, but developing that plan initially is definitely a big hurdle.
Right. But I think the moral of the story is now get it done. I'm down here at a conference and I was speaking with FDA and they said leniency is over. We need to get this done and we've had enough time to prepare. Next slide. So we want to talk about the negative impacts of failed FSVP audits. We know the number one is the fact that you're publicly, it's posted, your violation, your reputation, your brand is at risk. But there's some bigger, more costly ones like import refusals. And I can give an example of a client in Maryland who had a shipment, 2 shipments on the water, 1 shipment in the port. And they had been inspected 2 years prior to by FDA for FSVP, and they did not have any of their FSVPs written. So fast forward a year or 2 later, with 2 shipments on the water, 1 shipment in the port, FDA remote inspected them and found out, again, they still did not have FSVPs written. So in that moment and through that time period, FDA said, great, your shipment in the port is going to be refused or you can destroy it. And by the way, the 2 other shipments coming in that we see that are now headed to the United States, those will be import refused as well. So we're actually seeing where the FSVP can affect, your shipments at the port, whereas a lot of people think it's a slap on the wrist post. So I think it's now very serious in the sense that it's costly. I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars were lost with that shipment, those 2 shipments having to go back, and then demurrage fees for the current shipment in the port. Alex, what would you say your biggest non-compliance fear would be, as far as for your business? I mean, what could really happen with you guys?
Absolutely those import refusals. As much as being published on the FDA's website as a violator is harmful to your image, or the direct civil penalties that can be levied as a result of these violations, those import refusals can hurt not just your bottom line, especially if you have a perishable commodity like produce, or if you have something seasonal such as cosmetics or possibly other imported commodities that are affected by the act. But your relationships with your vendors can also be harmed irreparably as a result of these, because if you don't have the documentation lined up on your end, you're not a good trade partner.
Thank you. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, import refusals, all the product going back, all the thousands of dollars lost. Next. So one thing I really want to say is, often I'm talking to our clients or prospect clients, and I ask them, how long does it take you to write your FSVP? How many FSVPs are you writing a month? And often I get kind of a stare like not knowing. which tells me, are you really writing the FSVP? Are you completing the whole process? So I thought this slide was really important because when you talk about FSVP, what are we saying? What are you actually doing in that process? So on the left-hand side, you're going to see the big picture. You're actually collecting food safety documents from your suppliers. You're reviewing those food safety documents and looking for any compliance gaps there. And you're writing them, writing the FSVP and noting any areas of concern where corrective actions need to be taken. And then you're going to outreach to your foreign supplier and hope that he can respond and address those issues and then take corrective actions and then approve that supplier. So with that whole process happening, I would think that an importer would be able to say to me, oh, that takes us 30 minutes, that takes us 3 days, and so when you can't answer that question quite off the top of your head, then that makes me think that you're not going through the whole process. Is this a similar process for you? Any differences for produce, Alex, when you're writing your FSVPs?
That is exactly our process. Developing that high-level spec, you're required to review every 3 years, but then you need a plan, an FSVP plan per supplier reviewed per year. Best practice for us has been to review those on a rolling basis as the documents expire that need to be replaced. But it is a pretty significant time commitment.
Right. Hours and hours and hours of time. Not to mention if the supplier does not respond with the documents, more time is taken probably chasing that down.
Yeah, any of our colleagues here on the webinar who have experience with collecting documentation from their foreign suppliers, I'm sure have their own stories of tracking people down and, oh, well, why do I have to give you this? It's like, well, I don't want it. The government wants me to have it.
Right. So document collection and yes, and storage, super important. Next slide. So I don't want to leave out the foreign exporter because while FSVP is directed at the U.S. importer, the foreign exporter is affected as well because he needs to understand the U.S. importer's expectations from him and be ready to provide what is needed to the U.S. importer because the U.S. importer does have this requirement of FSVP. So we just kind of put a list here. The foreign exporter, as well as domestic, needs to have food safety documents. And you need to have your FDA facility registration. I mean, so many companies say, well, maybe we won't register until we get the buyer. We say register, have your food safety documents, be U.S. market ready before, because your U.S. importer is going to be looking for these documents. Making sure that you have a proper label if that's required, and make sure that if you do have an FSVP importer. If you're shipping to a trade show, you probably don't. So again, as the foreign exporter, if you don't have a U.S. importer, you have to hire an FSVP agent. And then now that FSVP regulation falls back in your lap. And so you have to take measures to hire somebody, an FSVP agent. So I want to repeat again, if you don't have a U.S. importer and you're a foreign exporter of food and beverage to the United States, then you will need to hire an FSVP agent. Alex, anything you want to add here as far as any additional documentation or different documentation from a produce importer perspective?
That's pretty much we've mentioned before, the documents that are required for produce.
Mm-hmm.
From an importer standpoint, for exporters that are not ready or capable of meeting these requirements, I can say personally that we have made the business decision not to work with exporters that are not capable of meeting these requirements in a relatively expedient fashion. And I know that we're not unique here in the market.
Yeah, and that's very true. We hear that a lot across the board here in the United States, speaking to the different U.S. importers. And like I said, pre-COVID, I used to go around the world and educate the foreign exporter on FDA. And I always told them, be U.S. market ready before you have the buyer. The buyer now has this, responsibility of FSVP, and they need you to be ready. They don't want to have to spend a lot of time getting you ready. So that's really good to hear, Alex. Next slide. So, top 10 FSVP best practices. I think this is so important to highlight because, again, a lot of us know the regulation, but what are some of the best practices in the industry? And, I just want to highlight a few. I won't read them all the way through. And Alex, I'll let you maybe share with what one of the ones that you think are most important to you, or maybe an additional one you have. But I think, right now I could say it's so important to have more than one person managing your FSVP program or having access to it. In the event that someone changes companies, is not able to be in during, if there was an FSVP audit, just so many different things can happen. And you just need at least two sets of eyes, and people knowing where things are, documents and monitoring and so on. Keeping your FSVP supply chain current. A lot of people that we are dealing with have their FSVP supply chain at the beginning of the year, and they just kind of keep it the same. They're not checking their DUNS number to make sure that nobody else is claiming them as FSVP importer. So you want to monitor that. You want to be always aware that your list is current and you have the proper number of FSVPs with the proper number of facilities that you're FSVPing. And then collect those food safety documents sooner than later. I think that that's a big problem, and I think it's less of a problem as FDA steps up these FSVP inspections. But make sure you get the documents and you renew the documents. So those are kind of some of the few I want to highlight. Alex, did you have anything that you wanted to touch on?
Absolutely. A couple here really stand out. Number one, the first question that auditor is going to ask you when they come in your door is not going to be, let me see such and such supplier's documentation, not going to be what are your activities. Their first question is going to be, who is your QI? Who is my point of contact here? And if you don't have a person, or at least two people, because you really should have one on site at all times. If someone's on PTO when that auditor walks in, you're going to be in non-compliance. You better have people on site that have that QI certification, or at least the training requirement. And as Coley states here in this deck, PCQI training really lets that FSVP qualified individual be capable of evaluating the documents that you're required to evaluate here. And really, number 8 here, monitoring of your supplier's FDA compliance status is a big piece. That is an enormous load if you do that manually. And I can tell you from audit experience that being able to present that you have this monitoring continuously, regardless of whether there's someone on site, it goes a long way in instilling confidence in that auditor's mind.
No, absolutely. Yes, we do get that type of feedback from our clients. And there's one other that I want to point out, and we kind of touched on it lightly earlier, is that if you can answer yes to the FSVP importer questions, but there's more than two people or one person that can answer yes, then get a signed letter of assurance or confirm that if you're the retailer and there's an importer distributor involved, he owns the product at the time of entry, but the retailer is the ultimate consignee, then who is going to act as the FSVP importer? Get that in writing. Is that correct,
Yeah.
Alex? Yeah.
Yes, that can either be in the form of an affidavit, as we've seen in some cases where companies prefer a written affidavit as a separate document, or if you have a mutually executed FSVP plan where both parties have signed, that also can function in that manner.
Absolutely. Next slide. So I think what we can agree and what we've heard in feedback from our clients, that the biggest challenge is connecting all this. Things are decentralized, they're disorganized, and they're the whole complexities of manual verification. So we really want to point out that, when you have compliance, you have sourcing, you have QA, all of those people are kind of touching and participating in the process, but it's decentralized. They don't have a place to go and centralize. Disorganized, often documents are here on the hard drive, somebody sourcing has it, quality has it. So that is another big challenge. Manual verification, when you have to actually manually go to the different FDA databases to pull up, oh, does my supplier have an import alert? Does my supplier have an import refusal? This is time consumptive. And as you can see here, 40 hours plus on per supplier. And I think maybe, anybody would agree that having to do this manual verification probably takes you away from other critical activities that you have. Any comment there, Alex?
Yeah, from personal experience, I can say when we were in the process of originally engaging with Registrar Corp to work with back when it was just called the My FDA tool, we had estimated that we would need at least 2 clerks full time to just for monitoring to
Right.
maintain all of our network of suppliers.
Right. Because, I mean, when you really think about it, monitoring your supply chain for their FDA compliance status means that you are going to several different locations. And not only are you checking on that, and that's a big deal when you're talking about 500, even 300, 200, 100 suppliers. You are now going to a database, several databases, and not only are you checking them, but then you have to document that you have monitored the supplier. And then you have to come up with your cadence, right? Are you monthly monitoring? Are you quarterly monitoring? And then keeping all that documentation there. So it
Yeah,
is
you
a
would you
very
would
big
need
challenge.
both a sorry to jump in there.
No,
You
no,
would
go
need
ahead.
both the controlling spec and of course objective evidence of all of those monitoring activities, which is the real bear there. I mean, visiting a website every day doesn't seem like a job, but once you're documenting that, certifying that you've viewed that that information meets your criteria for that specific FSVP plan, that's where the bear starts entering.
Right. Well, I'm excited to have John Keller now join us. He's going to talk about some things that will help us solve these problems, these challenges. So I want to hand it over to John.
Yeah, thank you, Coley and Alexis. Yeah, the theme that we've heard throughout the discussion, and thank you so much, Coley, for sharing some of your own customer experiences, and Alex, thank you so much for sharing what you've experienced at Nathal and Nathal. We heard some of the challenges of working in that decentralized and disorganized and manual sort of process for maintaining compliance and managing quality. Now, if anybody in the audience is feeling some of the stress of FSVP, don't worry, you're in really good company. Better than 70% of the industry has yet to digitally transform. So even household names and billion-dollar brands are managing these processes in file cabinets or on individual hard drives in a fashion that does expose them to risk and does create issues, not just with their FDA interactions, but day-to-day quality management. So we're excited to say that we've heard that feedback. We've purpose-built Comply Hub to offer a better way to manage these challenges. And if you could click. We have built Comply Hub to centralize your activities that multiple team members take to manage compliance. Alex called out multiple QIs within a business. We've also got stakeholders in procurement and supply chain who also play a role. So giving a central place for all of the interested stakeholders to interact with your supply chain is a powerful part of the tool. We organize all the information that you need to maintain compliance and make it very easy to share out of the system, whether it's being asked for by an FDA inspector or if there's another business case to work on that supply chain. And finally, we've built it to automate many of the manual and tedious processes that we've talked about. Alex has already mentioned the tracking down suppliers for documents, the labor required to monitor your suppliers in a compliant fashion. And so we're excited to show through this quick tour that we'll give how Comply Hub offers a better way and how we can make it easy, really easy, for folks to maintain FSVP compliance. As I share my screen with the Comply Hub solution, we'll dive deep today into 3 of our modules: monitoring suppliers, managing documents, and finding qualified suppliers. The first 2 functions really speak to the 2 big FSVP requirements: to perform ongoing monitoring activities. Alex said it doesn't sound like a full-time job to log into a database every day, but it sure is. And then to perform verification activities, which throw off a ton of different documents that we've talked about as well. Let's start by monitoring our suppliers. On this page, a lot of the attention focuses around the Regiscore. And our Regiscore is our proprietary calculation of supply chain risk. It's similar to the FDA's supplier index as well. And this is a quick look at the potential issues that you might have, or the likelihood that you might have an issue with this supplier. You can see at a glance that you've got some risk here, and with just a click, you can dive into deeper detail to understand what is driving that score. So for example, you can see the number of shipments cleared, detained, and you can even look at all of the products that this company is shipping through into the US and identify whether any of the items that you would be buying or do buy are those potentially risky items. We've talked about the different FDA databases that you are expected or required by the FDA to go out and search. And interestingly, it's not spelled out crystal clear in the law. A lot of folks find out the hard way that they're not doing an FTE, or in Nathal's case, 2 full-time employees worth of work, just to go out, search those databases, record that you've done so. We go a step farther than those 6 FDA databases that focus on the food safety and quality issues that you see here, your inspections, warning letters, import alerts, refusals, and recalls. We also look at good food safety practices, and where available, we find third-party audits such as SQF or BRC, and these, of course, are positive factors that affect the Regiscore, the same way that paying off a loan affects your credit score positively. Finally, we see our supplier list to the left. This is how we can navigate and look at different profiles and risk scores for each of those suppliers. The real power here is that through our data feed with the FDA, this is an automated supplier feed. And many of our larger customers really enjoy this feature because they'll see that folks are potentially, you heard Coley mention this issue, that folks are potentially using their DUNS number, naming them as an importer of record where they might not be, or alternately, they start looking and realize that a supplier is shipping a product from a facility that they are not monitoring and have not evaluated for food safety. And that represents a compliance gap and a risk. And so through automating the number of this supplier feed, and the supplier alerts, the different alerts that you would get on your suppliers, Registrar Corp makes it incredibly easy to stay compliant with this really tedious and time-consuming and potentially a little bit hard to understand compliance requirement. The other big bucket, like we said, of FSVP compliance is performing verification activities. And simply monitoring your suppliers for issues with the FDA is one good food safety measure. We also have the FSVP plans that Alex and Coley have talked about, but those are really just the beginning, right? That sets out the food safety practices and the other documents and the other measures that the supplier would have to take to demonstrate good food safety and FSVP compliance. We want to make it easy to understand your risk measures here and the calls to action. And so we can see in the document management system when we click in that we have 27 total documents related to the suppliers that were on that previous page, and that 14 of them are missing, which is a big risk area for FSVP compliance. And so we make it easy to go in and see where this has been requested, and with a couple of clicks to automatically request that file directly from a supplier. Another big challenge that folks face is not necessarily creating a document or storing it, but knowing what the right documents are for compliance. Our Smart DMS harnesses the data feed that we get from the FDA to understand the suppliers and the products that you work with, and based on that, to make recommendations of the types of documents that you'll need to ensure FSVP compliance and ensure that that foreign supplier is using good food safety practices. This is going to reduce the amount of time that it takes to manage your program, to assess suppliers, and by bringing our suppliers into the platform and allowing you to automatically communicate and automatically request those documents. Alex talked about tracking suppliers down for documents and explaining why you need this. Coley called out the other really challenging part, which is refreshing those documents every year. So automating the communication process between you and your suppliers as that document is set to expire is one of the powerful ways that we automate the manual processes involved with your verification activities. Now, in spite of your best efforts, some of your suppliers are not going to be compliant. They will either not be able to or not be willing to change their production practices to meet the standards that you're putting in place. And so every business that we work with finds themselves needing to strengthen their supply chain, needing to find new qualified suppliers. Alex had called this out, certain documentation requirements and expectations are a part of Nathal and Nathal's vendor approval process. In my experience in the food business, I've seen the sticking point and the friction between food safety and procurement really often. And this is a way to reduce that friction, centralize those operations, and bring folks to the same page and automate a lot of your supplier due diligence. So let's say that we've been working with our supplier to get documents. They are not compliant. We buy coffee and we're going to need some new sources. We simply click into our Find Qualified Suppliers module. We type in coffee, where you'll see the system gives us a wide range of different product types. I import ground coffee, so we'll drill in on this. And you can see that we can get it from sources across the globe. I want to go right to the source, so we'll look in Colombia. You can see that we give basic information about the supplier over here. For example, having a DUNS number is a good indicator that they're in good standing and commonly do business in the US. Having an FDA registration number, you can see the green check mark is a very positive indicator that a supplier is the type of quality that you need for your business. We stack rank suppliers by the number of shipments that they've put into the US over the last 5 years. And you can see the Regis score portrayed over here at a glance. You can dive into more detail on that Regis score, other products that supplier ships, and other information about that supplier with just a click right here. Or if you've already decided to work with them, you can add them to that automated supplier feed with a simple click over here. Now again, for the time on the webinar today, this is a really quick fly through. ComplyHub is a powerful system. You're seeing just a couple of the features. And so we encourage folks to schedule some more time to come back and see everything that ComplyHub can do for their business. Speaking of how ComplyHub can help a business, Alex had sort of touched on a story, and I'll give the mic back now to have Alex share how ComplyHub helped Nathal and Nathal with an FDA inspection and how those inspectors really responded to the export from the supplier feed that Alex was able to share.
Yeah, for us, the ComplyHub, or at the time it was just the My FDA tool, really helped us in our inspection. Not just from the ability to present that we had digitally approved suppliers and digitally approved different types of documentation, but by being able to generate that monitoring report, it puts a lot of ease in the mind of the auditor. When we first got started, we had one of those first inspections out of the gate. We had a remote inspection in December of 2020. During that inspection, we were still getting together a lot of the documentation because we had just put together our compliance program and we had just started onboarding with Registrar Corp. But by being able to present that monitoring report, it showed the auditor that we were making both the concerted effort and a financial investment in our own compliance. And that completely changes the tone of the audit. That goes from how can I get you to how can I help you be in compliance.
I really like that dynamic shift, that you almost felt the mood, the tone in the room change by showing this amount of due diligence. And I like the comment that I'd previously heard, that it shows a degree of seriousness in your business as well, right? I understand what you expect, FDA, right? I take that seriously and I've made an investment to do that. And that can really change. It's funny, Alex, I'm curious if you have any any additional perspective on this, but I hear from folks that, Lord, I thought that I had this thing licked because I had an inspection in 2020, and then in 21 I had a re-inspection, and that person was different, and I got a 483 for this and that, and so I'm curious, what have you experienced? Have you had multiple interactions with folks from the FDA? Do you have a sense of why folks come in with a different attitude, and how having this data and having this information can help sort of level the playing field and turn them from an adversary to a helper, like you said?
Yeah, and a lot of the people that you're probably hearing that from got that first slap on the wrist inspection back in the beginning of enforcement, that early 2020 timeframe, where a lot of the inspectors were still being brought up to speed on what they needed. A lot of industry was still fairly uncomfortable. I know a lot of the consultants out there, the independent food safety consultants, that were so helpful for everybody's all of their QMS development. All of them were kind of scratching their heads to figure out, what do we do here to stay in compliance? And some people went overkill, some people went underkill, and auditors like neither, because they don't want something that doesn't sufficiently cover their topics, but they also don't want to be inundated in paperwork.
Right.
So that second coming of that auditor to the site most likely would have been somebody that was a totally differently educated auditor from the first time they came on.
Right. No, absolutely. And I mean, I think in the end, as we talk about compliance with FSVP, it really does boil down to these three buckets. You want to centralize, you want to organize, and you want to automate. We saw that they were before challenges. Now these are solutions. These are the answers to the challenge. And with the tool, Comply Hub SaaS software, it centralizes all the information. So you have sourcing, quality assurance, compliance, being able to access documents in one place. It organizes everything so that your documents are managed in a system where it's under each supplier, but yet you see across your entire supply chain all the documents that are there. And then most importantly, automation. Because that represents serious money and savings of time and human resource at a company, as Alex, you pointed out. So this tool is monitoring your supply chain for FDA violations. It's monitoring your DUNS number to make sure that if someone's misusing your DUNS number and assigning you as FSVP importer. You can address that by using the tool. So it's also storing your documents with an auto renewal feature to it, so you don't have to remember when that document's 30 or 60 days out. It automatically re-requests it from a supplier. So we were really serious. We heard our clients speaking to us when they said, we need help with FSVP. We have hundreds of suppliers. How do you monitor them, all the different FDA databases? Here's the solution. How do you organize this information? We had the document management. And John, thank you for sharing all of that with us, because like I said, this is a response to the feedback and the requests from our clients that they needed help with FSVP compliance in these areas. Next. So I want to circle back around and say there's thousands of companies that we are working with, and they're using Comply Hub to organize, centralize, and automate their FSVP. They've freed up hours of time. They have not had to hire more people, because FSVP, as we've mentioned, and it's a resounding theme, time consumptive, and it's a lot of work. And just in the verification activities and the monitoring, and then having to actually write the report itself. So it is something that's really appreciated and valued by a lot of our clients. Next slide. So when we look about how Registrar Corp can support your FSVP journey, we have these three buckets of areas where you have software and services, where we have the Comply Hub, which you've just seen. We have PCQI online training, FSVP online training, and lots of other food safety courses that you'll train. We even help you with FSVP review, creation. Some companies just need help to get caught up. And so Registrar Corp has a team that can help you write your FSVPs. Often companies will outsource 50% of their FSVPs to us, 20%, just to get caught up. We want to catch you up because, as you can see, like I said, I mentioned FDA has told me that they are going to be stepping up and are stepping up the inspections. So you want to be ready. So let's get them written. If you need our help, that's a service that we offer. We have lots of resource guides, that we write blogs and articles. And so therefore, we're happy to share that with the industry so that you're being kept up to date with best practices, regulation updates. And so we have that available to you. So please use that. And then lastly, contact us. Contact us and let us know, where you need the help. I think a lot of times earlier, companies didn't want to reach out because they were a little embarrassed where they were in the process. But now, we're getting more and more phone calls because with the FDA inspections, you can't afford to wait anymore. So if you need help writing your FSVPs, having an outsourced qualified individual in creations and reviews, we can assist with that. Next slide. So we want to make sure that you get a copy of the webinar, and in that process and doing so, we just ask that you fill out a 2-minute survey. And with that survey, all survey respondents will get a copy of the webinar slides where you'll get to see again and have available to you, best practices, challenges, solutions, and you'll have all of that. And we so appreciate you joining us today. Next slide. And so I think what we can now maybe take some time for some questions and answers. I will be giving the answers. You guys will be giving the questions, to be clear. Okay, so I have one question here, and it says, how often should the FSVP be updated? The answer to that is 3 years, every 3 years. Okay, let's see. If your supplier does not have a food safety plan, what other documents can you collect to write an FSVP? So I'll answer that, and maybe Alex, you might want to chime in as well. I think you can, if they don't have the food safety plan, the preventive controls plan that most companies are supposed to have, you can request the HACCP plan, the process flow chart, the label, the product description. That's kind of a common, with those documents, you should be able to write your FSVP. Third-party audits as well. Alex, do you ask for anything additional?
Yeah, I mean those are the documents. The HACCP, it could be a Codex Alimentarius food plan. It could be at least for the produce space, any document where hazards are acknowledged and controls are considered.
Yes, absolutely. Alex, what advice would you give to a new, this is another question. Alex, what advice would you give to a new FSVP importer? Knowing what you know now, what could you help us with to be very proactive?
My advice to you is if you're close with or you work well with your suppliers that you're already working with, or if you have a prospective new business that you're looking to engage in, front load these expectations. Make sure that they're aware what you need, the frequency at which you need it, because if, let's say, you're located on the East Coast of the United States and your supplier is in Laos or Cambodia, and there's a significant time difference, if you get that 483 because you don't have the right document on hand and you can't get a hold of your foreign supplier within the response time, that could be a significant issue for you going forward. So what I would recommend is make sure that you and your partner are very aware of what you need.
Good answer. Yes, absolutely. Another question, so I'm going to ask it to you, Alex. What are some of the verification activities you can recommend that people do for their suppliers?
Absolutely. So those verification activities can include requesting testing records, as would be called out on their food safety plan or their HACCP plan. Basically, just you look at their plan and you see, okay, I see you're saying what you do, but now show me that you do what you say. any sort of objective evidence there. And I know that that we have used the monitoring report from the Comply Hub system as objective evidence that no, so these imports aren't being refused. None of these commodities are controlled. And I know it's a little bit more straightforward in the fresh produce space than it might be in some processed industries. But really, it's just making sure that you have objective evidence of some kind that your supplier is doing what they say.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have one more question here, and it says, how do you monitor the supply chain, and do you have to document? Yes. And I think the question is outstandingly yes. You need to monitor your supply chain. So there's two ways you can get this done. One, like we mentioned earlier, that you will have to go physically to different FDA databases on all of your 100, 200, 300 suppliers. And then while you do that, you document that. And then you have to decide, again, are you doing this monthly? Are you doing this quarterly? You know, how often you're doing it. So that's the one way you can do it. And then obviously the other way is using this tool, where this tool is monitoring your supply chain daily. And when there is a change and FDA publishes the change, the tool will alert you via email and inside the tool. So now that whole responsibility of having to physically go all these different directions goes away. And now you will just have that as automated, and the system documents it as well. And as Alex pointed out, you know, during an audit, you can show evidence of this. He can print out, export his monitoring documentation. So super important. Okay. Okay, so I don't see any other questions, but I think we can all agree that the time is now for FSVP compliance, and you don't need to worry about reaching out and feeling badly about where you are in the process. Right now, the important thing is to reach out. And if you need the help, whether it's through automation and a SaaS software or outsourcing to qualified individual services, we can help you with that. Alex, I really want to thank you for being on the call. I think it's super important that people hear from industry. You know, Registrar Corp, as a global leader in consulting, you know, we can speak to her blue in the face. But when you actually have someone that is actually doing this day to day, it really means something for people to hear, you know, your challenges and your perspective. Yes, so I'd like to thank John. I don't know if you have anything to add to this, but again, thank you everyone for coming. And if you do want a copy of the presentation, please take a moment and do the two question survey, and we will be giving all of the respondents of the survey a copy of the presentation. Thank you very much.